Okay, so the next subject comes right out of today's headlines. Our next presenter is going to speak to us about the weaponizing of government. Does anybody believe that's possible in here? We're watching it unfold before our eyes. Our next speaker is Mike Howell from the Heritage Oversight Project at the Heritage Foundation. Also the folks who brought us lunch. Yay, shout out for lunch. We are fortunate to have Mike with us today because he is an expert on this subject. He had worked for the Senate, for the Homeland Security Committee, worked in the White House, worked for the House Oversight Committee. He and his wife live in Bethesda, Maryland with their daughters. If we want to understand how the government, how its agencies are being used to be weaponized against us, but more importantly, understand how to see it and how to peel it back and fight it, we could have no one more expert than Mike Howell. And as he comes out here, there's going to be an informational video coming up on the screen, and then we can welcome our guest and our next speaker, Mike Howell.
For too long, the left have become experts in wielding government to advance their agenda. No longer. We, the people, know what time it is. We, the people, tell the government what to do. In 2025, conservatives will take the helm and we'll be ready on day one because we know it's time to save America. We have 2 years and one chance to get this right. This is Project 2025. Join to serve at project2025.org.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Howell. This looks like a real splendid crowd, so I take no joy in the news I'm about to deliver, but I also know it won't surprise probably everyone here. And that news is the observation is we're living in the peak of American corruption, and it's not even close. The closest we've ever been to this was yesterday, and I'm sure that tomorrow will set a new record for it. And what do I mean by this? When we think about American corruption or corruption generally, often it conjures up an image of a bag of money handed to an elected official to sign off on a deal or something like that. And while that's certainly at play, I don't think that captures the state we're in right now. I think it is best to understand corruption in this country as the severing of the tie between the people and those that are in power, either elected or not, to represent the people and their wishes and desires. I don't think there's ever been a moment in this country where that tie has been more severed. And it's abundantly clear in the news of the day, which we'll certainly get into, but I'd like to draw out two major themes and points about the state of corruption. One is the qualifiable sense. This is obvious for anyone who's running the numbers or looking into the state of the health of this country. We're well over $30 trillion in debt. Your grandkids, your kids, my kids, future generations have been robbed of the promises of all this country has to be offered. And for what? Let's do a quick accounting of the last 2 years of for what $5 trillion is added onto that total to get. It has been a series of massive cash transfers led by a uniparty control in Washington, D.C. to favored political classes, constituencies, beneficiaries, and corporate interests. The very first thing the Biden administration and their Congress did was pass what was known as the American Rescue Plan Act, which was nothing more than about $2 trillion that went directly to bail out blue cities and their bloated budgets that were getting ready to go bankrupt. And then also to bail out the public unions, the same entities that delivered the White House to the Biden administration got a cash payout as the very first act of that Congress and administration, all under the guise of COVID recovery. That's corruption. Next, we go into this so-called infrastructure bill, about $1 trillion, not much of which goes to infrastructure. Don't take my word for it. Look around. Does this look like a country that's under reconstruction to you? It doesn't. About 10% of that bill goes to actual roads and bridges, which mostly amounts to repainting old bridges, taking roads actually away in the name of green energy. The other massive amount of that money goes out to pay cronies. Fast forward to the Inflation Reduction Act, the final act of the last Congress, or the final major act, so to speak. We're talking about $2 trillion that had nothing to do with inflation reduction and instead went to punish red states, oil and gas producing states, in the name of giving beneficial tax credits and incentives to green energy producers in blue states. The backbone of the financiers of the left are the recipients of this payout. That's corruption, when our Congress and our White House are acting in ways that don't enlarge the rights and privileges of Americans, but instead just rewards political cronyism. Now, on the qualitative scale, this should be obvious to everyone in this room as well. The first family is immensely compromised in regions that are in direct impact to our national security and health of this country. The White House is careening on a path potentially towards World War III in a region in which directly financed the first family themselves. The media could care less about this obvious truth. Bombshell after bombshell is exposed, currently by Chairman Comer in the House of Representatives, and the mainstream media won't even acknowledge it. Look at the CCP, the chief foreign adversary of this country, the country that wishes to replace America as a superpower of the world. Direct payments from CCP entities to the first family, again, no one bats an eye, except for those in this room and some on the right. Mainstream media could not care. The corruption is evident for everyone who wishes to see it. Now, I know I'm here to talk about weaponization, and so let's tie this together. Weaponization is the means by which the elite first obtain power and then maintain power. Weaponization takes many forms. I think in looking at the context of this administration, it's important to note that the election system itself was weaponized against the American people. In order for this administration to take power, the rules of the road were changed without the consent of the people in many places. I know this state one of them. The ways by which they attained that power also included the weaponization of our very own federal law enforcement, the FBI, in suppressing critical information and critical investigations that would have done harm to the Biden administration and others that wish to take power. The weaponization of the government in working with the tech companies to manipulate information, to hide information from American citizens, had a massive effect on an election which ultimately came down to tens of thousands of votes in a few swing states. The point I'm trying to make here is weaponization that's happening now all flows from that original weaponization. And the forms that we're seeing weaponization occur right now are across the board. Across the board, absolutely. Look at the Department of Justice and the way that they treat different people in different political parties. We have a January 6th investigation, in which is called the largest investigation in American history. They just announced 1,000 more arrests are coming down the pike, mostly for nonviolent trespassers. Compare and contrast this to the treatment of Black Lives Matter rioters who burned significant portions of this country down. No federal action was taken against this vast national conspiracy, which, by the way, was in part financed by the current vice president and her fundraising for it. That's weaponization. Look at the Department of Education and our state education bodies and even local, school boards, and the push to turn our schools into recruitment centers for transgenderism. That's what it is at its essence, about creating transgender children. That is weaponizing your tax dollars against our children. That is weaponization. It's coming directly from the White House, who declared, not a week after a transgender shooter shot up an innocent school, that it's now a transgender day of visibility. Look at the IRS. Soon after, whistleblowers came to the House Weaponization Committee with explosive testimony about weaponization in government. The IRS knocked at their door. That's weaponization. Look at big tech continuing to put their thumb on the scales. I know many feel confident that Twitter has calmed down since Elon Musk took over, but that is not the universe of big tech in total. We look at people being debanked for having conservative viewpoints. We look at stories throttled downwards that could hurt the narrative of the regime. Big tech is working in concert with the left and the federal government at every step of the way. Look no further than Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter itself, with the FTC trying to stop it the whole way through, with countless demands trying to muddy up the waters and prevent even one person turning the tide just a little bit. So that's the state of affairs right now, and it's not great, admittedly. The complete weaponization of our government at every entity, federal, state, and local, and agencies that span from domestic policy to foreign policy. So the question is, what do we do about it? I think the answer is that we have to act like it. We have to view the forest for the trees. No more living from one scandal to the next and viewing everything in their nice little cordoned off spaces and moving on after it escapes the news cycle. Not at all. We need to fundamentally rethink how we view this current administrative state and the regime that occupies it. That means we stop giving the regime the things that they want the most. And what they want the most from you and I and everyone in this room is our compliance and us conferring upon them legitimacy. They want us to nod our head and take what they say for granted. And we can't do that. What we need everybody in this country to come to terms with is that this is a corrupt time in America, and it is the most corrupt time. We need people to understand that the outcomes of that corruption are that the American people's wishes and desires are not met. The outcomes of that corruption are that our future generations will never enjoy the promises of an America that we've enjoyed. They're slipping through our fingers every single day. We need to understand that a consequence of this corruption is an absolute extremist ideology that is propagated by a small minority of this country who holds immense power, both political, financial, and global. It's those people who are dictating the terms of this country's direction to the rest of us. So we need Americans to understand that the State of the Union is not strong, and our institutions and our principles are not self-perpetuating. I think that's a bold break from conservative tradition in which we have often fought to conserve the things that we think are best. Well, the bad news is most of those things are gone. The long march through the institutions has all but ended. It is a spiking the football moment for the left. So it's time, I think, to change the direction and tone and attitude of the conservative movement towards a counter-revolutionary fighting posture, whereby we are not just advocating for ideas and policy, but we're advocating for ways to actually get power. Because without power, policy and ideas are meaningless. They do not self-effectuate. And the only way we get that power back is if we use the limited resources we have now and the things that are on our side. One thing on our side is the vast majority of this country isn't down for what's going on right now. They're disgusted by it. But it's incumbent upon us to turn that disgust into action. And I think we do that by explaining what's happening in this country. And there's a few ways we at the Heritage Foundation Oversight Project aim to do that. One is through a massive amount of litigation. Unfortunately, this is also the least amount of transparency in our federal government that I think we've ever seen. For a simple FOIA request, there's a Freedom of Information Act request to get information out of the government, you have to go to federal court now to sue on it. That takes thousands and thousands of dollars. Your average citizen cannot do that. So that is one thing we at the Heritage Foundation are doing. We're currently in 25 lawsuits in targeted areas where we think we can expose, well, actually we know we can expose because we already have, and we're going to continue to do it, bad actors and weaponization. Two is we need to call on our elected representatives to stop acting like it's business as usual. The rhetorical window has to shift. This is not about living from an appropriation cycle and a reauthorization of a federal program to the next. No, this is a wholesale cultural change we need amongst our elected leaders in which certain entities and parts of government don't get a dime as they continue down this path. Because this government that is occupied right now is seeking to extinguish any opportunity we will have in the future to change it. I think it means that for the next election cycle, we are on guard like we have never been before. That means that very careful scrutiny is given to everything that happens in our election systems. We know the name of the game at this point, as this country's been flooded with mail-in ballots, with little accountability and oversight, without voter ID, with massive ballot harvesting collectors, and big money operations. Not a lot of people know that that activity has also moved to within the federal government right now. A lot of you are familiar with Zuck Bucks, which happened in 2020, which a billionaire Mark Zuckerberg paid private NGOs to go out and weaponize the election systems by collecting, ballots in areas he thought would help the left. That's happening in the Biden administration right now. It's called Biden Bucks, Executive Order 14019, with everyone in here's taxpayer dollars. We need to get wise to this ongoing activity and snuff it out now with real consequences. And that requires an absolute urgency from us in the grassroots all the way up to our elected leaders in Washington, D.C. And then finally, we need an actual plan of what we're going to do should we win those battles with the power that we want to get. And that means we cannot have a slow start in 2025 if, conservatives do take power. And that's why, we have at the Heritage Foundation across the conservative movement something called Project 2025, which is looking to fill the next administration not only with the best and brightest and most importantly, the most, the biggest love of the country individuals from around the country, not just Washington, D.C., but also the policies and the playbooks to get those things into motion on day one, whether they're regulations, executive orders. The legwork and the brain work needs to be done now so it's a ready-to-roll roadmap on day one. So that's the fight as I see it. That's the state of weaponization right now. And I'll close with this. I know that sounds dark, but I think this is a call for optimism. Not in the way that it's optimistic to think everything is going to be cheery and this is going to be a fine and dandy couple years and a nice road, but optimism in the sense that a heavyweight boxer has before going out to a big match. In the sense where the nerves are peaking, you're looking at your opponent, you know it's going to be a drag-out, knockout fight, but at the end of the day, you know you're going to win and you're probably going to get slugged a few times along the way. That's the fight I think we all need to be gearing up for, because if we don't do it now and allow the weaponization to continue, we're going to be laughing at how little it was now. And what I said today was peak America corruption, because in the close of this decade, it's going to be far worse. So with that, thank you all very much.